You are listening to Talky Bnonnsense, a grab bag of bonus discussions, short and long, about issues small and large, and today's issue, Smokey tells me, is very large indeed. Smokey, go.
It was recently the new year, 2025. Everyone has been making New Year's resolutions, including ourselves, one of which very creatively was to go for more walks. So the other night we were going out for a walk, and we saw another couple about our age also going for a walk, and there was a little moment where I wanted to be like, yay, New Year's resolutions, solidarity, but I didn't, because that would have been awkward. But it did get me thinking about the fact that we attach such importance to the start of the new year. It genuinely feels like a new beginning, and we all say things like, ugh, this has been the worst year, I can't wait for it to be over. As if the year being over means something, as if the mere turning of the calendar will somehow heal our grief or fix our friendships or mend our finances. And we feel genuinely energized at the start of the new year. Some of us, I do. We make plans and goals for how this will be our year, or, new year, new me, or new chapter, or however you want to put it. And I think this is cross-cultural, at least there are many cultures that celebrate the new year. People have years, right?
The Chinese, famously. Monkeys and dragons and things.
I mean, maybe in some cultures, the New Year is a time of change, in that it happens at the changing of the seasons. I think Matariki and Chinese New Year, maybe. But for us, that's not even true. I mean, it's mid-season. It's arbitrary, if you like. It's definitely cultural to some degree. If you were washed up on a desert island and you lost all track of time, you would have no way of knowing when the New Year was. And I don't think some internal mechanism would make you feel motivated or rejuvenated on January the 1st. But I also think it's innate in the sense that humans were built for rhythms. We have the annual rhythm of the seasons, we also have the daily circadian rhythm, we have the monthly lunar rhythm. Now, we know that some of these can be disrupted by removing various natural stimuli. In solitary confinement, without access to light, people seem to quite quickly lose their sense of day and night. There was a fascinating experiment called the Deep Time Experiment in France in 2021. They put 15 volunteers, 7 women, 8 men, into a cave without any sunlight or clocks or access to the outside world. And they were just sort of sitting there. They had various tasks they had to do and so on. When they came to fetch them out again 40 days later, as they had arranged, the people were very surprised to see them, because in the dark, their sleeping and waking cycles had lengthened to the point where they thought only 30 days had passed.
Yes, there's an important point here actually about the distinction and relationship between innate features and culturally mediated ones. Rhythm is innate to human nature and to creation in various ways. We have a heartbeat, we have a circadian rhythm, which in turn is responsive to the rhythm of night and day, which in turn changes according to the rhythms of the seasons. These things are built into creation itself, so they are innate. And they are innate in us so that our circadian rhythms still exist even when there is no night and day, but they are not properly regulated. But they also form the basis. They give us the natural desire and the need for liturgical rhythms, which are not innate. They are established by decree, you might say. They are a positive law rather than a natural law. Whereas we would fall into natural rhythms, even if we were stranded alone on a desert island. There are other rhythms that we take for granted only because everyone else does them. They're not unnatural, because in fact they are motivated by our natural need for rhythms, but they are not imposed by nature itself. Liturgical rhythms aren't built into our biology like circadian rhythms. I think they fall into a similar category as conscience. Everyone has an innate sense of right and wrong, but this sense is very malleable. Man does not learn ethics by simply following his natural instincts. There are cultures where killing and enslaving and eating anyone outside your own group seems absolutely normal and permissible. And there are other cultures where killing and enslaving and eating even animals like cows or pigs seems vile or wicked. They are both relying on the same instinct that right and wrong exist, but they're filling those categories with opposite things. And this is because instinct alone, natural law alone, is not sufficient and was never intended to be for humans. Even from the beginning, God gave a word of the tree in the midst of the garden, you shall not eat it. Whether you have a cannibalistic culture or a vegan culture or a Christian culture, these are established by word, by how people teach each other and treat others who break these rules, these words about behavior.
God formed Israel's conscience around the 10 words, and in the same way he also formed their rhythms around the 7 feasts. We all would naturally develop certain rhythms of life over time, and different cultures have developed different rhythms, just as they have developed different consciences. But God gave Israel the liturgical rhythm of the Sabbath, the Passover, Pentecost, booths, etc., and the church has historically had a liturgical rhythm of its own, which is something we are slowly trying to reintegrate back into our low church Protestant background. The significance of rhythms as religious is why there has been so much distrust when new movements arose and tried to enforce new rhythms on humans. After the French Revolution, the government decided to be rational and mathematical and do away with this silly 60 seconds, 60 minutes, 24 hours system. So they imposed French Republican time, or decimal time, which divided each day into 10 hours and each hour into 100 minutes. They had 10-day weeks, 3 weeks to a month, so each month had exactly 30 days. And then they had a handful of 5 or 6 holidays at the end of the year to kind of catch it up to 365 days. Presumably because even the French wanted to be kind of sort of on the same page as the rest of the world and, the sun. And this was explicitly anti-religious. Churches were forbidden from holding services on any day except the 10th, which didn't just mean fewer religious services, 1 in 10 instead of 1 of 7, but it was a real kick in the teeth for the Sabbath pattern. And it was a failure. People hated it. They had to change it back. Even something as minor as daylight savings time is still hugely controversial. We discovered a while back on holiday that Queensland outright refuses to do it. The rest of Australia does, but this one state is just stubbornly out of step with the rest of the country. And it's quite lovely, and I think that illustrates just how strongly people feel about that particular rhythm.
It reveals an interesting interplay between the natural and liturgical rhythms. Just as many cultural norms can violate our natural sense of right and wrong, there are certain cultural norms that violate our natural sense of rhythm. For instance, on some level, every father who performs an honor killing on his daughter knows that what he is doing is violating the natural order that God built into creation. He suppresses that truth in unrighteousness, but it is still down there. It's possible there's something going on in a similar way with daylight savings, and I'm not suggesting that observing daylight savings is as bad as honor killings, but the same principle is happening. It is a very presumptuous idea. It certainly seems to follow the spirit of the French Revolution. We find the natural rhythm of creation inconvenient, and so we decide to count the hours differently during summer than winter. Scripture counts the hours from sunrise. It was about the 6th hour, which is something you read in the Gospels, means that it was about the 6th hour since sunrise. It was noon. The sun was at its zenith. And the hours, therefore, get longer in summer because you don't add hours to the day, but the day still gets longer. So the 6th hour should always be when the sun is at its zenith, and the 12th hour should always be when the sun is setting. So as the time between those things expands, the hours themselves expand. But to make life more convenient for us, we have fixed the length of an hour, and then not only that, we change when the index starts depending on when we want to get up. We arrange the entire accounting of the day around ourselves instead of accounting ourselves around how God arranged the day. This seems to me perverse, because we are not actually changing nature in the slightest, we're simply pretending that we are. In Queensland, at least, they appear to have the sense to say enough is enough, bad enough that we've decided that an hour is 33,93,474,372,000 ground state hyperfine transitions of a cesium-133 atom instead of 1/12 of a day. Let's not add insult to injury by deciding that 6 a.m. actually starts an hour later during one season than another. Let's rather just get up an extra hour before work in summer.
This is all pretty obvious, maybe, but it leads to an interesting question. What about eternity? I think there are ways to read about heaven / the new earth that make it seem like time is very inhuman and incomprehensible there, sort of rhythmless, if you like. The imagery is that there will be no sun, so no diurnal rhythm, presumably no night at all, and no sea, which means no tides, possibly no moon if there's no sun or no night, which would mean no lunar rhythm. And the fact that it will be forever and ever makes it seem like years, if they could exist at all without the sun, were irrelevant.
I've noticed that many people believe heaven is entirely without time at all. They treat eternity and atemporality, or timelessness, as synonyms. But to say that we will live forever without experiencing any time passing is actually incoherent. It tries to communicate one of the non-communicable attributes of God to us. We certainly become partakers of the divine nature more fully in heaven, but we know that this doesn't mean that we become omniscient, for example, because infinite knowledge is not possible for a finite creature, which is what we will continue to be. And the same logic applies to time. God does not experience the passing of time in his essence precisely because he is immutable. He is not subject to change. He cannot get better, and he certainly cannot get worse. He cannot gain knowledge, and he certainly cannot lose it. But we are finite and mutable. We will live forever, but if we don't experience that as a progression of moments, then you're forced to say that we experience all of our never-ending lives simultaneously as a single timeless event. That is God's experience, inasmuch as we can speak of God experiencing, but we are not able to hold infinity before us. As finite creatures, we cannot be timeless, because we cannot take in an infinite life unless it unfolds to us in a series or progression of finite moments.
I think this misconception about time is one of the reasons people tend to dislike heaven. Have you noticed that? A lot of people really seem to feel repelled or at least ambivalent about the concept of heaven. Some of them are just completely ignorant and think it means being angels on clouds playing a harp. And let's face it, if we wanted to play the harp, we would learn the harp. It's a very doable accomplishment right here on Earth if you have the motivation. And then some people think it means being bodiless, like an energy ball. Others think it means being androgynous. I had a guy online once tell me that I'd be a man in heaven because womanhood is only necessary for reproduction, and since there are no babies born in heaven, all souls will default back to male. He was quite surprised when I was offended by that. And a lot of people think that we will be changeless, that we will arrive in heaven either omniscient or as close to omniscient as God will let us get, and then just live statically in that state forever, never learning or growing or developing or experiencing new things. Maybe just standing in a choir chanting holy, holy, holy for eternity with a kind of fixed Stepford rictus of joy on our faces. Well, I mean, no wonder people aren't keen.
Yes, their conception is often fundamentally confused. They think that they will be timeless or changeless, same difference ultimately, but also that they will have to endure an infinite series of moments singing or playing the harp because they intuit that music requires time. I suspect that they have conflated incorruptible with unchangeable. But we need to remember that heaven, as most people think of it, is only the intermediate state. The final state is the new heavens and the new earth. It is a state where physical and spiritual are merged harmoniously.
Right, it is a natural development of the state in which man was created in the beginning, the original state redeemed and reborn. It will be tremendously different since sin has affected all of creation in ways we can't even begin to tease out, but it will still be earth. It's not like everything familiar will get completely tossed out of the window because no rules apply because, it's space lol. God is a God of order, and when he made an ordered universe in Genesis 1 and called it good, he meant it. Our kids sometimes ask things like, in heaven could you eat a poison mushroom and not die? Or what would happen if you jumped off a cliff in heaven? And it's very fundamentally missing the point about what being a wise and sinless human in heaven would entail. I suspect we won't die from poison mushrooms in heaven because we won't eat poison mushrooms, either because we will learn over time using normal human methods of study to be really good at mushroom ID, or because we will know we aren't and refrain from being foolhardy.
Or there might not be poison mushrooms.
That's possible, but one person's poison mushroom is another person's cure for...
That's the thing, isn't it?
The secret to space travel, who knows? Because, yes, there is reason to believe there'll be expertise in heaven. Why do people think we're going to start off as experts in everything? I don't get that. He who has made much of his talent on earth will be given more in heaven. I think we'll specialize. I think over time our knowledge will increase, and we're beginning to see value in disciplines we'd ignored before, especially as we see how interconnected they all are. One day I might even find myself studying football, but unless God fundamentally changes the nature of man, the exploring, learning, creative nature, we won't start off prepackaged with all the information of the universe. There's no reason to think God would suddenly start working that way, that he would break his established pattern.
He would actually fundamentally change human nature into angelic nature, at least as it's conceived in the classic Christian tradition. Angels don't experience the passage of time, at least in the same way we do, because being pure spirit, they are able to actualize everything at once. They're made as they are, and that is how they are forever. The distinction between angels and humans in classical Christian thought, as I understand it, is that humans are creatures that can actually change over time. And
hang on, how does that square with Satan falling and the other angels?
I don't know. I mention it only out of interest, not because I am an expert in the matter. I'm sure they have such answers as they were able to invent.
Interesting.
But that's also why once they fall, they cannot be redeemed. It's because they have fallen
they get to change
all at once, as it were. And
right.
Yeah, it's hard to explain.
Intriguing.
Anyway, we should talk about the nature of the new heavens and the new earth and possibly angels some other time, because it is an intriguing and somewhat vexed question to me, but you were making a point more specifically about time and rhythms.
Right, yes. I think it's interesting that while in one sense time and rhythm are very inherent in us and fundamental to our being, in another sense we have a very queasy relationship with time. We are uneasily temporal. We are notoriously terrible at judging time, for example. Without looking, how many minutes have passed on this podcast so far? Check now.
17.
See if you got it right. Probably not. I don't know. Is it your actual guess?
That's my actual guess.
This is pre-editing.
17:49.
Okay, that's pretty good. But once you've edited, it won't.
It won't be.
And this, this is a very small amount of very recent time that you have probably just realized you didn't quite get right. We are awful at remembering whether something significant happened, 7 or 10 or 15 years ago. And we get downright freaked out about the passage of time as it relates to us personally. It is genuinely jarring when we see a friend we haven't caught up with for a while and then her baby is now 8. We react against it. And famously, especially for millennials, I think, we just cannot deal emotionally with the fact that movies came out a certain number of years ago. The first Avengers movie was 15 years ago now. Or I saw a photo of Viggo Mortensen the other day. Fully grey hair. That was a shock.
Viggo Mortensen is 66, and you know how old Ian McKellen was when he played Gandalf the White in Return of the King? 64.
Did they give him age makeup though? Because my dad is 78 and does not look
he's
as old as Ian McKellen in
old.
Return of the King.
Ian McKellen just has resting old face.
I mean, they gave him a fake nose. I wonder if they wrinkled him up a bit. Still, though, yes, this is disturbing. I saw an interview with Jennifer Lawrence recently, and she's married and has kids and is like spouting sage maternal wisdom now. That was trippy. I was like, shouldn't you be drunkenly defacing a monument somewhere? And this is all, even the celebrity stuff, it makes us aware of our own mortality. That's why we care. No one's ever like, whoa, can you believe the Battle of Culloden was nearly 300 years ago? Because that doesn't make us feel old.
Knowing that World War I was over a century ago does make me go a little bit, whoa.
But did your grandfather fight in it?
No, but he remembered it.
Okay. That's something. But like the pyramids, good long time, doesn't really bother us, right?
No. Too long ago. Once it gets past a certain scale, it loses meaning.
Absolutely. But the whole concept of a midlife crisis is a man realizing that life is passing him by. And certain people are obsessed with it. There can be a real anxiety to thinking, I only have 30 years left. Or realizing your lifespan is more than half over. I think this is often portrayed as a sin, like vanity and desperately clinging to youth. But I don't think that's entirely fair. Death is unnatural and we are meant to be repulsed by it. It is the last enemy to be destroyed. And yet with all this paranoia and anxiety, we can also struggle to keep that perspective in mind. There are lots of proverbs dedicated to reminding us that we should value life in its brevity, like the days are long but the years are short, or memento mori, all flesh is grass. Recently a thing went viral where someone said there will come a day when you pick up your child for the last time. And then, while everyone was having a brief existential crisis over that, they were running around trying to pick up their teenagers, someone else pointed out that there will also come a day when you buy your last bottle of hot sauce, and you could have already bought it. And honestly, that is the one that I keep thinking about. A related story, I read a Reddit thread once on people who had won lifetime supplies of stuff. And one guy somehow managed to win a lifetime supply of WD-40. And it was 2 bottles. They had calculated how much the average person uses in a lifetime, and like that's the amount. So when the Bible talks about life being a vapor and the grass withering and the flower fading, you can just mentally add life is 2 bottles of WD-40.
Unless you have close to teenage age boys, in which case,
a lot of
for some reason,
joint lubrication.
Life is many bottles of WD-40. I don't even know where it goes.
So essentially, I mean, if we're afraid time will be funny in the new Earth, I mean, it's funny here. We don't live simply in time.
To return to where you started us off, I think it's natural that people want to mark the new year, to cut off the old and bring in the new. But it's more interesting to me that they see it as a transformational event, a transformational moment or season, a renewing time, a new beginning with new possibilities. That is not so intuitive if you think about how man has thought about time throughout history. There's a kind of paradox built into time, which man has intuited. We have naturally seen the year as a microcosm of creation itself. It's the most basic and foundational and inescapable large-scale unit of time, and every year is characterized by a descent into death and darkness in autumn, and then a new birth and resurrection in spring. So it does make some sense to see the new year in terms of springtime, a new beginning, even though our new year does not begin in spring, but 1 week after the birth of Jesus. But the other thing about the year, which ancient peoples noticed very clearly, is that it is always the same. It's the same cycle. Just because you had spring last year doesn't mean you won't descend into death and darkness this year. So there's a kind of inevitability and futility to the resurrection side, given that you know it won't last. Winter will inevitably come again.
This corresponds to a cyclical view of history itself, which seems to be the dominant view in cultures before Christ. And it does make sense, given how cyclical our experienced rhythms are otherwise. It's not a stupid thing to think. And I think if you've never kind of got on the cyclical view of history, if you've always thought it was just kind of stupid, one of the best pieces of media available to really emotionally steelman it as an argument. And it is important to steelman pagan arguments because we tend to think they're stupid, and they tend to actually not be stupid. They're wrong, but they're not stupid. There's the musical Hadestown. Hadestown is primarily a retelling of the story of Orpheus and Eurydice. That's the one where she dies, and Orpheus goes down to the underworld to get her back, and he sings a song so beautiful that Hades himself is moved. And so Hades makes a deal that they can both travel back up to the living world, but Orpheus has to go first, and if he turns around to look at Eurydice at any point before they get back, she gets zapped back to the underworld. And of course, being a Greek tragedy, Orpheus makes it all the way to the top and triumphantly turns around to greet his wife, but she hasn't quite made it out of the cave yet, and so he loses her forever. All very sad. Now, Hadestown, the musical, was written by Anais Mitchell, and it seems that she has a very good grasp of the ancient Greek worldview, because she intertwines this story with another Greek myth, the story of Hades and Persephone. Hades is the king of the underworld. He meets Persephone and takes her down under the earth to be his wife. But her mother Demeter, goddess of the harvest and crops, mourns so fiercely for her daughter that all the crops die. And she and Hades eventually have to come to an agreement for the sake of the world that Persephone will live with him for 6 months of the year and with her for the other 6 months, and this is the origin of the seasons. Now, when the musical is set, Hades and Persephone have been going through some marital discord, mostly because Hades, in this version, is a power-hungry, ultra-capitalist, company, town, slave-owning crazy person, and is also very insecure about losing her to the upper world, which she clearly loves a lot. So he's been building this garish industrial hellscape to impress her, and she is very much not impressed and also turning to drink. And the upshot of it all is that he's always late to drop her back at the underworld and always early to pick her up, and the weather is going crazy. The line is, it's either blazing hot or freezing cold. So the world is literally out of rhythm. And eventually Orpheus, being a musician, figures out that it's because the gods have forgotten the song of their love. So there's this lovely intertwining of musical rhythm and the rhythm of the seasons.
Which I imagine is intentional, certainly in the ancient worldview, not just the seasons, but the entire cosmic order, the progression of the stars was thought of as a form of music, and human music was considered to be derivative of the music of the spheres. The spheres were this kind of perfect, almost abstract, idealized form of music which came first, and then our music was really just trying to imitate it.
Right, yes. And so, because these two myths are combined in the musical, when Orpheus sings his song to rescue Eurydice, he sings about how Hades and Persephone need to essentially get it together and realize they still love each other. And so he sings the song of their love, and they remember it, and they reconcile, and it's a very beautiful moment. And at the end of the musical, we see Persephone getting off the train back into the world right in time for spring because Hades trusted her enough to let her go. And the world is back in tune, and it's triumphant and lovely. But of course, that's that one myth. The other myth is Orpheus' story, and we know that doesn't have a happy ending. In fact, we really know it, because at the very beginning of the show, Hermes, who's the narrator, emphasizes that this is a sad tale, it's a tragedy, but we're going to sing it anyway. So Orpheus turns around, and Eurydice is essentially sucked back into hell, and it's beautifully done and tragic. But then, how do you end a show on a downer like that? You know, there's plenty of musical theatre that ends on a downbeat plot point, but you really want to leave the audience going, oh, like, that was depressing, that was it, okay. So after the tragedy, you have to somehow make it uplifting and end on a high note. So in Les Mis, Jean Valjean dies, but he is welcomed into heaven by Fantine and Eponine, and we get this kind of ghostly inspirational anthem from the voices of the students of the revolution. It doesn't make a lot of sense in a way, but there's hope there. Or in My Saigon, Kim shoots herself, but her son does get to grow up in America and have a future. Just giving you all the spoilers for all the musicals here.
Spoiler alert!
You should have seen them by now, okay, come on. But the way Hadestown does it, very, very cleverly, is to stage the entire show as a cycle. So the last song is almost the same as the first song, as if you could just play the show over and over and over again on repeat. It's the same song, sort of set in the same place, same tune, mostly the same lyrics, but they have a new poignancy after you've seen the show. Brilliantly done. And again, the narrator, Hermes, reiterates that it's a sad tale and this is how it ends. But then he injects this note of triumph. He says that the whole point is that they know how it ends, and the very essence of the human spirit is to just keep singing anyway, as if it might turn out this time. And with just a few lines and some clever instrumentation, he hypes it up as a win because everything is back in rhythm. Persephone is back for spring, Orpheus has lost Eurydice, and his plucky young band of singers are going to sing it again and again. Now, this is hard to convey the emotion of this entire musical in a summary, but I can assure you that in the moment it is tremendously emotionally effective and poignant. By tying a real cyclical rhythm, the seasons, into the cycle of Orpheus' tragedy, we are sort of conned into believing that both are equally true and good and beautiful. But of course this isn't true. If history is really doomed to repeat itself, Orpheus actually is trapped in a loop in which he will never ever save Eurydice, and that's actually not inspirational, that's nihilistic and hellish. In fact, even his success in reuniting Hades and Persephone is pretty hollow, because we know at some point they're going to fall apart again, and the world will be back out of tune again, and there will never be an ultimate resolution. Now, I don't bring this all up just because I happen to really love this musical, but because Anna S. Mitchell does what all the adherents of cyclical history have to do if they don't want to descend into complete despair. She imports meaning.
You see the same thing happen with the new atheists. Materialism is also at least a somewhat cyclical view of history. The whole concept of materialism is really just a rehashing of Baalism and Asherism. So there are hypotheses that, the Big Bang was only the latest in a series of expanding and contracting universes, and there's a heavy emphasis on cycles of extinction and rebirth. So it's expected that at some point in the future, most or all life on Earth will be wiped out and the process will start again from scratch. And the heat death of the universe might actually put a stop to everything with a whimper rather than a bang, but certainly our reality is not heading towards some final glorious culmination. And this, to a sane mind, should be depressing. But do new atheists act like it is depressing?
No, what they want to do is import concepts from better worldviews, like awe and wonder. And it really gets my goat because they stole that. Their worldview does not actually allow for pontificating about how we're all star stuff. The only reason you chose the term star stuff is because it connotes transcendence. But you literally don't believe in transcendence. There is nothing actually thrilling about things being very, very far away and twinkly if we're all just meaningless conglomerations of atoms. It might provoke certain chemical reactions in your meathead that we describe as awe, but those chemicals do not necessarily reflect reality in any way. They're just a byproduct of some chance evolutionary mutation that once upon a time helped a far distant ancestor of yours survive long enough to have more babies than the other guys. You might as well say we're all shed insect exoskeleton stuff, because that's equally true. But you have...
Wait, I'm made up of shed insect exoskeletons? Try saying that 3 times fast.
I mean, as much as you're made up of star stuff, yeah. It's all recycled, everything, an old Smeg fridge, probably.
I'm going to have to process this.
Yeah. But, if you are an atheist and you have these genuine feelings of love and wonder and awe and you don't know what to do with them, you try to perversely make them meaningful by being meaningless. It's like life is precious because it's random and short. Like, okay, if you really believe that, you'd have a lot more respect for mayflies. And Joss Whedon is terrible for this, actually. He is an atheist. This is Joss Whedon as in Buffy, Angel, Firefly, the first 2 Avengers movies, and recent Me Too allegations. He is a master of his craft in terms of storytelling and subverting genre and structuring film and TV, even things like scene transitions. He did what he did brilliantly. Genius, but also stupid, because he has this constant theme of futility is nobility. Like, the highest heroism a human can achieve is to do something pointless and hopeless because it's right. Being a permanent underdog is kind of the pinnacle of moral development. And that's dangerous because it superficially resembles the Christian worldview. Like, we believe God is going to win in the end, but at times, right now, behaving like a Christian sometimes can seem like fatalism or defeatism.
Yes, it would be a mistake to think that Christianity has a linear view of history, in opposition to the pagan cyclical view. God did, after all, build the cosmos to follow the cycles the pagans noticed, and our own experience of it is conditioned very heavily upon the daily and annual cycle, which is a repeating, essentially unchanging phenomenon. But God also built even greater movements into the cosmos, movements that are far beyond our own experience, and which point to something beyond a cyclical existence. Christianity's view of history is not a cycle, nor is it a line, it is a spiral. It's an ascending circle that doubles back through the same essential patterns over and over again, but without repeating them exactly.
Well, I bet it's a Fibonacci one.
You think it just keeps getting further and further out till eventually it's basically a straight line? It's not necessarily a dumb idea.
Thanks. Always the tone of surprise.
In fact, this is what our own experience is. There is always a forward or upward motion as we go through the daily and annual cycle. We don't end up where we started. There is progression. And the same is true of the cosmos as a whole. The stars, given for signs and times, do not just perform a circuit over and over again, pointing to the same signs and times in a fatalistic pattern. They turn continually forward toward new signs and new times. The zodiac itself moves in a progression that will not repeat before the end of history. We are leaving the age of Pisces, so-called, and entering the age of Aquarius. And that doesn't mean what the New Age perennial tradition neo-pagans think it means, but it does mean something. The music of the spheres continues to develop and progress towards an end that is greater than the beginning, because history is a personal event. It's a story being told and superintended and unfolded and ruled over by the Lord Jesus, with a conclusion that draws every event into a satisfying, coherent whole.
This is where the sense of progress that even non-Christians have comes from. This idea that a new year can be a new beginning, a rebirth, without the fear of fatalistic regression, without the hopelessness and futility of just repeating your own mistakes. This is a reflection of the Christian cosmology. We are, in our own small way, participating in the upward spiral of history, telling our own part of the story that Christ is weaving together. We see ourselves as personal agents with personal power over our place in time, because there is a personal agent with personal power over time itself. That is a uniquely Christian idea, and simply didn't exist and doesn't exist outside the gospel.
And that is why the rhythm of New Year's matters?
Exactly. I figured we could get really meta here, and instead of having a conclusion, you can just listen to the whole thing again. You'll observe that this is unsatisfying.
You are listening to Talky Bnonnsense, a grab bag of bonus discussions, short and long, about issues small and large.
Exactly.